Good morning, everybody. My name is Kinga Winiarska. I'm a president of Western Michigan chapter. I would like to thank our sponsors, Spectrum Health, Steelcase, Whirlpool, Tech Systems, and Pinnacle Center. Today, we are going to have a presentation, the workshop, Your Common Sense Approach to Project Management, Strategic Design and Project Delivery, and how to bridge the gap. Our speaker today is Mr. Lee Lambert. Mr. Lee has a vast project management experience with over 50 years of practice. He achieved senior management role under 40. He is one of the only 70 people in the world to receive the honor of PMI Fellow. Lee is past president of neighboring Ohio PMI chapter and had an opportunity to present this workshop around the world within just a few months. And we are his second US-based chapter. So definitely a great privilege to have Mr. Lambert here with us. We are very honored to hear him give us his presentation. So Mr. Lee, if you would like to present, I have your screen up, your presentation up.
Thank you, Kinga. Thank you very much. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate it. Having come to your chapters is a real honor for you. You don't really understand why, but here's, I mean, it's simple. It's a simple situation. I'm in Hawaii. I'm in Ohio, and you're in Michigan. That's enough said. So as the Buckeyes go, so go the nation. So I'm happy to be here. I've been on the road, virtually on the road since the very 1st of May. I've done about 27 of these programs. I have an objective of 55 so far scheduled, and only 2 have been in the U.S. I did Arizona very early in the process, and now I've had the pleasure of joining with your group. So I love the topic. I created this opportunity in concert with the things that are going on at PMI National. Now, if you might remember a guy named Sunil Prashara. He's the new CEO of the PMI. Well, he introduced at the International Symposium in the Global Congress, I think is the official name now, introduced something called the project economy. And as I begin to investigate this project economy, I begin to realize that what he was talking about is what I've been talking about since I was a little kid. I mean, I've been in the project management world for 54 years, and this is kind of the same thing I've always thought of, and that is the project economy, as he calls it, translates in my terms to everything's a project and everyone's a project manager. And so I think it's important for us to understand that it ties into this idea of how do we close the gap between delivering projects for our organization and at the same time staying in sync or in alignment with the strategic objectives of the organization. Now I'm going to try to tie in some real world experience. This is not a theoretical presentation. It's really based on a lot of years of experience and having tried what works and what doesn't work, and now finally selecting the good stuff. I'm going to rely on some experience base. One will be General Electric Corporation. I'm sure you've heard of them. Another one is called IBM. Pretty sure you've heard of them. And the last one is Roche Labs. Now, I'm sure you may have heard of Roche Labs, but I'm going to use those 3 experiences, those 3 working hands-on opportunities to think about how do I maintain the linkage between the work that I do and the organizational betterment. You see, most of the people that I work with in organizations basically feel like they don't really, they're doing the project because they got a project charter and because they have a scope, time, cost guidance, and they're off and running, but they don't really know why. They don't know why management says we need this and we need it fast, and nobody ever asks the question why, because that's an important question that needs to be asked. So as we look at this, one of the things I want to tip you off to is when you get a project charter down, according to the PMBOK, when you get your project charter, you have to recognize that you ought to be looking at that charter and saying to yourself, well, what strategic objective does this project support? In other words, why are we doing it? Why are we doing this project? So we want to be able to say that so that we know what the linkage is. And I'll explain a lot more about that later in terms of how important it is. Now let's switch over to the management side. I mean, we as individual project managers have a very serious responsibility to make sure we know what the strategic connection is so that we know what our project is going to contribute. Again, I'll give you some additional reasons why that's important. Now let's switch to the management side. Now management, and this is from all three of the organizations I've had the experience to work with, management goes away, let's say annually. It's different for different companies a little bit, but annually they go away, the C-level, CEO, CIO, CFO, COO, all the C people go away and begin to create the strategy that will take the organization where they want to go. That's their ability to move in that direction. So they'll stop and have meetings and sessions and determine where they want the organization to go. And when they do that, then of course, in order to implement that strategy, they have to develop a list of business objectives that support the strategy. What can we do in the business environment we're in to support the strategy? And out of that comes projects. It's a spawning of projects that come from strategic definition, business objectives, and finally down to the individual projects. So you can see when we start the projects, at least, there's a linkage that we have to maintain. That's the problem, is that it gets broken. That linkage gets broken, and now we find ourselves working hard on a project that may or may not add value to the organization because we've become disconnected. So we have these capabilities, and in order to deal with these different sorts of projects based on their planning, we've evolved to a variety of management methodologies. And one, of course, that's been around since I started at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in California in 1966. Now, all the projects I was assigned at that organization were carried out in a, quote, predictive model. The predictive model basically said we're going to have a start, we're going to have a finish, we got all the milestones in between, get her done, and they assign responsibility for getting those things done to the individuals on the team. And by the way, back in those days, and you can eat your heart out here, back in those days, we got a project, we got a team of people assigned to the project. That's what they did. That's the work that they did, was that project, and they were full-time according to what that project's requirements were. So we had a much different environment. Well, then we started doing a lot more IT work, as we started to see the potential of IT in terms of business decision making. We started to do a lot more IT projects. And when we do the IT projects, go back to that last slide, would you, Kinga? When we do these projects, we created this thing called Agile. You're familiar with this, I think, Agile. And Agile carried with it some big benefits. It came into being in 2001. The Agile Manifesto, which is sort of the equivalent of our PMBOK, was published in 2001. And 19 years later, we find ourselves aggressively implementing Agile everywhere you look. Everywhere you look, it's Agile this and Agile that and Scrum this and Scrum that. And it's turned out that Agile can deliver projects that support the strategic objectives more effectively and in a more timely way than we were having experience with the predictive model. So we have these two models now in the new PMBOK that's coming out in January, 7th edition. There's going to be some major changes that address this issue of delivery. How do we best deliver projects that support strategic objectives? And in the old PMBOK 6th edition, it's 90% predictive model. That's the way we've been doing it for years. But in the new one, it's 50% predictive, 50% agile hybrid. So you can see a massive change in the content of the PMBOK based on the utilization of a methodology that delivers projects that support business objectives that fit in the strategic objective and plan more effectively. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Now, what's strategy? Well, strategy is simply determining how I get from point A to point B. What are the things we need to do to be successful? Now, the business people have determined the ROI and all of the benefits, and that's how the strategy got designed in the first place, based on time, based on cost. So that's the way it got determined. Now, as we execute individual projects, any one strategic objective could have possibly 3 or 4 projects that support the accomplishment of that strategic objective. So we need the linkage to identify what those are. We've done that in a little bit by creating portfolios of similar project efforts that support certain strategic objectives. So we're constantly looking at how can we better connect the project work that you and I do on a regular basis using unfortunately borrowed resources. How can we do that more effectively to assure that the strategic objectives of the organization have been met? All right, next slide. Now I put this in. This is kind of irrelevant, but it's kind of not, because what happens is project managers, you and I and anybody with the experience of executing projects, often have the knowledge to do it with very little guidance. And so they basically say, leave me alone, I'll get it done. Don't confuse me with facts. And they bury their head in the sand and the world passes them by. So you as a project person need to, how can I say it? You need to pay attention to what I'm saying, because this can leave you in a bad way if you don't actively involve up front with this idea of how do I link and keep linked project objectives with strategic objectives. In other words, justifying why the project's being done, so that we know when we slip schedule or when we overrun costs, we know what the impact on the project is, but what's the impact on the strategy? If I disconnect from the strategy, I end up managing the project really well, but having the organization fail. So we want to be sure we don't underestimate the importance of how all this fits together. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's where it starts. Here's where the fun starts. That's why I have a kind of a sick understanding of fun. But the problem we have, and one of the primary reasons that we disconnect from strategy, is that various C-level people, various higher level people, higher than us, okay, higher than PMs, all are under the misconception that the work they are doing is priority one for the organization. It's the most important thing the organization's doing. And everybody with half a brain should understand that you can't have more than one priority one That just doesn't make any sense. If you say, well, this is priority one, and this is priority one, and this is priority one. Okay, we've got 3 priority ones. Now let me ask you a simple question. How do I know when push comes to shove? How do I know what leverage I have? How do I know how much empowerment I have as a project manager to get this project done when I look around and say, well, wait a minute, they're saying all 3 of these are the same priority, then I have no leverage. So you've got to understand your leverage. I will tell you without question, and any of my old managers are listening, you know this is true. My career is based on capitalizing on leverage. Understanding from the project management perspective, how much leverage do I have in the decision-making process? And until you get a grip on how much leverage you have, you're going to be at a disadvantage to people who know, because they're going to impact the decisions that enable you to get projects done based on the leverage they have. Now, what I mean by leverage is if I'm working on project priority one, let's imagine for a minute I'm working on project priority one, and Bob, the resource pool owner, the owner of the engineering group in the matrix, I go to Bob and I say, listen, Bob, I need 3 subject matter experts in order to maintain the schedule on this project. It's due out in 3 months, and it's a high priority project. It's a key element input to the strategy being accomplished. Bob looks around and goes, well, Lee, I don't have 3 subject matter experts just sitting around. I mean, I'll have to give you some apprentices or some new people that just started, or but I don't have 3 subject matter experts. Well, here's where the leverage comes in. You remind Bob who he's here to serve, for one thing, is the organization, and then you go on to say, but Bob, do you not understand that this project is number 1 on the CEO's radar? In his mind, this is the most important project we're doing this year. Did you not get that message? And suddenly what you're going to find happen, you're going to get your subject matter experts. Now that impacts some other projects, I understand that, but priority one gets priority one treatment. And those downstream, so to speak, will have to fight for themselves. They'll have to understand what priority is their project in order to maintain the staff. You've got to remember the subject matter expert resource pools that are managed in this matrix. They're managed on a different plane. They're managed based on, have they applied all of their people across the board? Have they kept everybody chargeable, if you will? No hours being paid that are being paid out of the company's sack, if you will. So we got to keep all of these people committed. So they don't pay as much attention to what project they get assigned to. They just make sure they all get assigned. So with leverage, I can begin to help that strategic person, if you will, understand where he fits in this particular organization. So first off, I got 2 things. On the project charter, you look first for what strategic objective does this project support. The second thing you look for is what's the relative priority of this project. With those 2 pieces of information, you should be able to understand what it's going to take to get your project done and what's realistic in regards to how you can utilize the organization to maintain that connection. Remember, when that connection breaks, well, let's go to the next slide, please. If you look at this this slide, what I'm trying to get across here is we're attempting to create a strategic linkage that can't be broken without understanding the impact of the break. So what we're trying to do is take all of the projects and we vertically integrate them using the work breakdown structure. That's God's gift to project management, it's WBS. So we got the vertical hierarchy laid out down to the work package level. Okay, 80 hours of effort is what we use in PMI as a rule of thumb. It's erroneous. I mean, it's small. Let's just say it's small. And so we do that, and we get that WBS, and we start to do what? Well, we get to the bottom level, and now we have the small pieces of work that we're going to manage. And what we do then is we start to resource them. So we look at the work content based on the WBS, and we can see I need a subject matter expert, I need an intermediate engineer, I need a fresh new engineer just out of school, and I assign that person to the work. That person brings with them a charge out rate. That person brings with them the ability to estimate how long it will take to do that work. And all of a sudden, we've created a triple constraint at the work package. Remember, this idea of projects, it's just not that complex. I mean, that's why you make the big bucks. Project managers know how to get this stuff done. And one of the things we know from our efforts in the past is that the WBS is just a framework. The WBS just creates the capability to get things done. So we've got the vertical hierarchy, and we do that for every project. So when we merge them, we end up with a resource plan across time. We end up with a cost plan across time. And so now all that's left is to do horizontal integration. Remember, if I'm creating a strategic linkage, I want to know that if project B misses schedule by 3 weeks, I need to be able to know that I can identify quickly, the impact on the strategic objectives for the organization, because we've created a linkage that goes from the strategic objective to the business objective to the project objective. That's what we're trying to get accomplished. This takes thinking. There's a lot of pain in project management because it requires you to think. And what you have to understand is this ain't brain surgery. You've been doing this since you were a kid. We all do project. Remember what I said? Everything's a project and everybody's a project manager. We've been doing it for years. Now we're just putting a little more structure in it, a little more capability to make sure it happens. So we have to assure that we get that integration of all the information. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the fact that we can't do this by hand. Now, when I was at GE, we did a lot of it by hand, and that's just, you can't do that. I mean, you take let's say you take a $200,000, $300,000 project over a 7-month period, and you got to do all this and integrate it and report it and status it and forecast it by hand. Get real, okay? You can't do it. Let me tell you what IBM did, okay? You know IBM? IBM has been around a while. Well, in 1993, I got the opportunity to work directly with the turnaround of IBM. They brought in a guy named Lou Gerstner, former tobacco guy and American Express guy. They brought him in to turn it around. Okay, so Lou came in with a lot of reluctance to admit that he hadn't turned a company like that quite around, but he's willing to give it a try. So what he did was he analyzed the organization for almost 6 weeks, just talking to people. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we not doing? And what he found, here's what he found. This is the key point for you. What he found was there was a dramatic disconnect between the thousands of projects that IBM was doing in 1993 and the strategic objectives that the organization were trying to achieve. Okay, they were forecasting in 1993. Now hold on to your hat. They were forecasting for IBM an $8 billion loss. Okay, so he had a big job ahead of him. So he spent those 6 weeks. He came out of those 6 weeks with 2 proclamations. The first one is we're doing too damn many projects. We got so many projects going on, we don't have any idea which one contributes to the strategic objectives and which one doesn't. We're going to reduce the number of projects by 600. 600. And they're going to be gone. And then we're going to focus our attention on the strategic objectives that will be supported by the projects that are left. That was a big announcement. CEO, people at high levels in the organization freaked out. So he had to have a meeting. He said, "Hey, look," he put it in simplistic terms. He said, "Here's the train. Here's the train. There's the track. That's where this car's going. And if you want to go jump on board, I'd love to have you. But if you don't, step off because we're going forward." Well, 7 of IBM executives stepped off that day. They said, what does this guy think he's doing? Well, I'll tell you what he did. He turned the organization around. Well, here's how he did it. Here's how he did it. Second proclamation. We are going to implement project management throughout IBM in a holistic way, and it will become the thread that ties everything together. Okay. Now, if I were saying it to you for this workshop, I'd say, and it will become the chain that links everything together. And he made that proclamation, and he immediately backed it up by forming the Center of Excellence for Project Management, which to this very day is the benchmark for PMOs. Okay. So he implemented all that, and within a 3-year period, he had completely turned IBM around. And he gives credit to the ability to integrate all the data by using automated capabilities to integrate all that data to see that they were supporting the correct, in his mind at least, correct strategic objectives. To everybody's shock, at that particular time in computing, the ThinkPad was the chosen tool for individuals to have as a computing capability, the IBM ThinkPad. It was famous. You could go on an airplane and you'd see 20 people with a ThinkPad out working on it on the trip. Okay, so he decided though the ThinkPad was not consistent with or connected with the strategic objectives as he perceived them. And so what did he do? He sold their most profitable project at that time. He sold that piece of equipment to the Chinese. And it's now known as Lenovo. So when you see someone with a Lenovo laptop, you know that used to be IBM. So he used this connection, he used this ability to analyze a cause and effect in a way that enabled him to make decisions, some would say light years before previous management, but he was able to become a very proactive decision maker when it comes to managing the variety of projects and keeping them in line with the particular strategic objective. Okay, I hope you understand that. Next slide. So what we've got to do to make this work, in order to remember, data is data until we turn it into information. So we can have all the damn data in the world, and if we don't turn it into decision support information, what we got is a bunch of data. So first thing we need to do is create a stakeholder study, because if we're going to build a database that provides what we need to make proactive, effective decisions, then we need to understand thoroughly who are all the stakeholders and what are their stakes. Okay, so I want to talk just a little. I have a 3-tiered stakeholder, and I learned this in my time with General Electric. I have a 3-level stakeholder study. One level, the first level, which you don't show on this slide because it's the senior control level. It's the people who can say, stop or start your project. Some of them signed the project charter, some of them didn't, but still have the ability by their position to start or stop your project. These are the control stakeholders, and we need to know who they are. We need to know what their stakes are. This is that strategic linkage, and then we need to make sure that we communicate to them in a way that they can feel comfortable that their strategic objectives are being accomplished. Okay, so that's the first level. Second level is the level you see in front of you, and that is pretty much everybody on the team, whether they work for you or whether they're on loan by the matrix, they are this level stakeholder. And I call these the influence or impact stakeholders. Influence or impact stakeholders. In other words, anything they do could potentially impact or influence the outcome of the project. That's everybody. That's everybody. Including you as a project manager. We're all stakeholders in this project environment. We all need to have the information to enable us to do what we need to do to achieve the strategic objective that our project supports. One of the important people that we sometimes leave off of this is the matrix resource pool owner, since they have such a impact on our project based on who they assign to the project. We've got to keep a very tight communication link with them so we can as quickly establish a cause and effect relationship of resource allocations so that we can support the strategic objectives. Okay, so that's the second level. Third level is the interested level. Okay, interested. They can't control your project. They can't have an impact on your project, but they are the interested stakeholders, and it means just that they're interested. They're interested in what you're doing on your project. They're interested in how your project's going. They anticipate a project like yours in a few months. They want to kind of keep track. It's it's a live action learning curve. The information stakeholders are just that. Well, some people, and this is a mistake, but some people will say, well, look, I don't have time to around with the information stakeholder. I got work to do. Well, that's fine, except the organization can pay a big price with that if the information stakeholder isn't able to get the information they need to support the effort they anticipate they'll be doing. It's going to have a negative effect on the organization. So take time to do it. I'm going to give you a quick example of the impact of not including the information stakeholder. This example, it can be quantified. I can quantify it. So if you want to argue with me, I'll take you to the book and I'll show you. The fact of the matter is, this is 11 billion with a big B, $11 billion benefit realized from an information stakeholder. Okay. So third company I refer to is Roche Labs. Now, diabetes is growing quickly in the U.S., and in the 90s it was growing quickly as well. And so there were a couple of in-home use blood glucose reading tools out there. My company that I was working with in Castleton, Indiana, was actually a wholly owned subsidiary of the Engelhorn family empire in Mannheim, Germany. But they had located in Castleton, Indiana, had done extremely well, but then were hammered in the marketplace by Johnson & Johnson, okay? So that set up my contribution. I was recruited to manage a Save the Company project. They were losing market share so fast that they estimated that in 18 months, if they didn't have a replacement in the market that was better than Johnson & Johnson's, they would have to shut the doors. So they recruited, I interviewed, they liked what I had to say. They said, okay, it's your job. You pick your team and you can have your team committed 100%. The only issue is we got to get her done in 18 months. Well, my first question, well, what's typical? What's normal in this environment? He said, well, normally it's 3 years. So basically I was charged with a project that should take 3 years to be done in 18 months. So 50% less time, okay? And so, but I said, okay, it was a great opportunity. I picked my team. First team I picked was the members of my team were the chemists. This was a chemist, blood interaction with chemistry to read the blood glucose levels in milligrams per deciliter. So I recruited 25 very good chemists out of a group of 100. They had 100. There's a lot of work they were doing besides diabetes. But I picked 25 what I consider to be the best chemists for this project. Well, immediately I hear shooting at me from the outside, people complaining, why didn't I get picked? I've been here 22 years. I should have been on the team, blah, blah. And so I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't in the mood to hear it, and it was wrong besides. And so I said, well, we got to quell that little riot right there before we have anything bad happen. You know, maybe we get the Secret Service in here, man. No, but anyway, we got to quell. So what I did, here's what I did, and I recommend this highly. I took my 25 chemists and I took their 75 chemists, and every Friday for 4 weeks, I had them spend 2 hours in the afternoon with no agenda, just talking about what they were doing, what was working, what wasn't working, what kind of materials were they, just exchanging information. Okay. Well, it made the outsiders feel good, made the insiders feel comfortable that they no longer were looked at as the bad people. And 4 weeks ended up, we had to get on with it. Okay. Well, I'm going to make a long story short. We finished that project in 18 months. That project was deemed a miracle project. PMI has written it up in the PEMNet, September of, I think it was 2001, but I forget for sure, but it's been written up as a miracle project, okay? Well, let me tell you why I refer to this as Roche Labs, because I just told you it was a wholly owned Engelhorn family event in Mannheim. Well, the project went back in the market, regained massive amounts of market share, and 3 years after completion of that project, that little $1 billion company was acquired by Roche Labs for $11 billion. It's still the highest profit margin, most rapidly growing market position product that Roche Labs has. Well, the thing that you need to know is that the chemistry, which was the heart of the project, the chemistry that ultimately went to market, and by the way, I use that product. I'm diabetic. I use the very product we developed. That product went to market based on the chemistry that was created in the organizational resource chemistries. So the chemists from the organization, not my project chemists, from the organization were responsible for developing the chemistry composition that changed the world of diabetes forever. Okay, that's why you need to know. That's why you need to understand. We added in the PMBOK, some of you are old enough to remember, in the PMBOK 5th edition, we added a separate component called Stakeholder Management in recognition of the criticism of this process. Don't short circuit it. So when it says you need a communications plan, this is at the heart of that communications plan, a stakeholder study. So don't overlook the importance of it. And that means from the top level to the bottom level. Next slide. Of course, in order to do all of this, as I mentioned, we have to have tools. We have to have tools. I mean, that's kind of what the world of project managers has become, is the guy with the most tools wins. And so I want to caution you. Don't go crazy over tools. They're only as good as the person using them. So again, I'm going to give you my guidance for what it's worth. I have 3 tools that I recommend highly. Work breakdown structure for the reasons that I've cited earlier on. Vertical integration, and all of that goes along. And by the way, it builds the capability to do everything else. because we build a cost estimate, we build a time estimate. So we've got that basis for our estimating capability. Okay, so now we create a baseline. Then we also have to have a critical path schedule. This is a missing component, and probably 7 out of 10 projects that I review, when I ask them if I can see their critical path schedule, they bring me a Microsoft bar chart schedule. Okay, they don't get it. You need a critical path schedule. You need to know where the critical path is, meaning the path with no float that has to be done on time. You need to know where the float paths are, because that's the flexibility you have in utilizing resources as they become available, and that becomes the key to success. That's the key to linkage, by the way. If you link that critical path schedule to the strategic objectives, then every time something changes on the schedule, remember the chain link that I talked about? Every time something changes on the schedule, if it impacts the strategic objective, bells and whistles go off, flags go up, and we have a chance to take a look at that. Now, the third one that I don't really have a name for it on here, but you recognize it, is risk management. I'm a huge proponent of risk. Ever since I met Carl Pritchard, who's to me Mr. Risk, he's convinced me that we could save a lot of projects and a lot of work by investing in effective risk management up front in these projects, not after the fact, not in the middle, but up front. And risk management is not a one-time thing. It goes on through the life cycle. So when I ask you if you got risk management, you bring me the risk register, that ain't it. We need to have management. We need to assign people responsible. We need to follow up on whether those risk events are being managed or not. So those are the three. Now, someone already hit it in the chat function that I left the most important one out, and that's common sense. Common sense is not common, and that's the problem. We've gotten so tied up in intellectual thinking and utilization of exotic tools that we've sort of put common sense to the side. So I'm encouraging you to get back on board and use that common sense that you have to do the job that needs to be done. If you need a tool, use it, but if you don't, don't. So that's something that you have to pay attention to. All right, I want to talk a little bit about some of the techniques. Now, the next slide you'll see is sort of a on its way out slide. I don't even know why I got it in here. Once we started the march toward Agile, then the waterfall, which had been used for an awfully long time, began to fall to the wayside because people became enamored with the shiny object we're calling Agile. And so the old was being replaced by the new. Now, there are still Agile shops. I run into them every once in a while. I do some teaching for the LDS Church in Salt Lake City. They have their IT people, and they've got a huge IT group. They have them set up in a waterfall and an Agile group. So we got two separate groups. But if you look at the Agile group, what you're going to find are a lot of, let me just be gentle, older people. Because they kind of fall into that old dog, new trick thing. Hey, I'm getting ready to retire. Why would I want to spend 2 more years learning how to do Agile and so on and so on? So there are still people using waterfall, and there are still projects where we combine Agile with some applications of waterfall as well. We call that a hybrid. And so those are things that we just need to be aware of. If you're a waterfall person, then be aware that look for ways you can integrate into the Agile environment without failing to do the job you want to do. All right, Cost. All right, now if you look at this slide, though, this is the one. This is the slide that says it all right here, coming up right about in a second. Right about now. Okay. Sorry about that, Kingo. I should have paid more attention. Okay, so there's a few things wrong with this graphic, but I put it in here on purpose so that people who are transitioning to Agile, who have not really had in-depth experience with Agile will kind of get a sense. Because I was anti-Agile when I started. I'm going to tell you that right up front. I'm not going to lie to you. I was anti-Agile. The more I see it, the more I see the benefits, the more I see the potential, the more convinced I am it's a great way to do projects, IT projects, okay? Not production and construction, and those are going to be done predictive in almost every case, okay? But if you look at this, I've tried to make the analogy between Agile project management and rugby. If you've ever played rugby, uh, this is basically what Agile is. This is, if you think about it, with the word Scrum is taken right out of the game of rugby. Okay, and the way they play is they throw a ball in the middle of Scrum, where there's like 10, 12 people all around in a circle grabbing onto each other, waiting for the ball to hit. The ball lands in the middle, and now there's pushing and shoving and biting and kicking, and eventually the ball squirts out. Somebody picks it up and runs as far as they can before they're tackled, and they have to have another scrum. Okay, well, inherent in that thinking are some significant benefits for project management. We are analyzing status on a regular basis. There's no variable. We're going to do it every time, whether you like it or not. We're going to have daily stand-up meetings. Stand-up is just to imply they're not going to be lasting very long, because we're going to get on with it. And in those stand-up meetings, we're going to ask you what you got done yesterday and what are you going to do today and what's going to get in the way. And the Scrum Master's job is to get rid of whatever's going to get in the way. And that's fundamentally it. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? And so they'll have a sprint, a couple weeks sprint. They'll do that, and that's the way they do business. And the fact of the matter is, those who really know how, I'm not one, by the way, those who really know how to make this thing sing and dance can get projects done more effectively. I've seen it. I've looked at it in amazement to say, how they do that? Well, they utilize Scrum in a meaningful way. And when they're all, and so you could literally daily, you could say, are we still connected to the strategic objective? Daily, you could say that. So we don't run near the risk as a predictive model of disconnecting from the strategic objectives, because we're looking at it on a regular short-term basis. So that's the idea behind that, is to be able to do that in a way that capitalizes on frequent evaluation of the product. Now remember, one of the things that Agile does is it allows you to elaborate the requirements. In other words, we don't have the requirements when we start. We don't have final requirements. We begin with what we have, and then we elaborate those until we finally get to a finished product. Theory is we can deliver working or valuable products sooner with an Agile than we can with, quote, waterfall approach. So that's the idea. If you want to play a little bit of Scrum, and I learned something the other day. I was doing the program in Arizona, and one of the guys said, "Well, you didn't know this, but I played rugby, and the person to the right of me was the hooker." Well, I told him I think that's a different game, so we didn't talk about that much. But I guess there's lots of things we can look at with rugby and see some application in our world, in our real world. All right, slide please. Next one. We're getting on the home stretch here. This is a good one. This guy carrying this enchilada, that's you. Because when we're all done here, you are gonna, when we're done, you're gonna go crazy. You're gonna want to run out and start doing this right away. You're gonna go out and tell your boss, I want to see that strategic objective list now. That's what you want to do. And then of course you'll be looking for a job after that. But if you can be sort of assertive into how you do it, that'd be great. But one of the things that you got to know is that you got to do it. Because you see these two characters sitting here at the table, they've been saying how important it is, how much they want it, how much they need it. But now they're finding out that, hey, it ain't free. You've got to invest in what it takes to connect strategy, stay connected with strategy, and get projects done at the same time. You've got a responsibility, Mr. Decision Maker. Do you want to pay me now or do you want to pay me later? And so your job is, sadly, and you know, we don't like being salespeople. I know what you think of salespeople most of the time, and I don't want to be that. But the fact of the matter is, somebody's got to make sure they understand. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's big. Yes, it's important. And yes, it's valuable. So we want to be able to explain that. You want to be able to talk about it in the way that I've talked about it today so that they can begin to understand how this all fits together. All right, last slide, and then we can see if there's any questions. The reason I put this slide in here is to kind of make a point back to my slide where we had the ostrich putting his or her head in the sand. This is kind of what I wanted to point out. I know this guy. In fact, I know two of these guys. They look just like this, okay? And the reason they look like this is they did it to themselves. I kept telling them, you got make sure, is your project linked up with strategy? I'm not worried about that. I got scope, time, cost, targets. That's what I'm going to get done, okay? So move aside, Lee, and let me get my project done. And we counseled on this a couple of times, and I was rejected out of hand every time. Good friend, too, by the way. If you look at that, then you got to understand. Well, here's the thing. He finished his project. He finished it on time. He delivered the scope he'd been identified, and he finished it within the budget, and he got fired. And the reason he got fired is because the project no longer supported the strategic objective of the organization. So he did a great job. Nice work, great job, you're fired. Two people I know have fallen victim to disconnecting from the strategic objectives to the extent that their project, although successful in generic terms, was a failed organizational project. All right, that's all I got to say. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So what do we got? You got questions? I got answers.
We do have some questions.
Good.
How do you connect to strategic objectives when your organization doesn't have a clearly defined strategy?
Well, that seems easy to me. You just need to have a little chat with the organizational management and emphasize the criticality of having and using a strategy to the extent that if they don't see the light, if you could present it in a reasonable way and they don't see the light, then what I'd suggest is change companies, because a company with no strategy is a losing company. And I don't know if you want to be associated with that, but I think you can do it. I think we can make our point. That's why I had you selling that enchilada to those two characters. We need to make a point of how important it is to have this strategy and allow the projects to be connected.
Okay. We have a second question. When we discuss strategic objective, are you focused on your organization's strategic objectives, your client objectives, or a combination of both?
Well, that's a good question. If you look at it, when you think, I've had this come up a lot, this organization versus client. And I guess, first of all, I'll say if my organization objective or strategy is inconsistent with my clients, that's a big mistake right there. That's going to get you nowhere really fast. So the first thing I would look to is to make sure that those are in sync. If they're not, I'm going to say something about it. But I want to make sure that that's the case. So the entire organizational strategy should be built around what kind of clients do we want, and what are the needs of those clients going to be, so I can build my structure. Now, when I'm forming a new company, for example, I do that. I identify my target markets. And once I have my target markets, then I can identify what's the strategic involvement I have to achieve those markets. So, I mean, I think it's a matter of showing. Here's what I always do. Oh, I'm going to answer probably more questions this way too. I always look at every situation in terms of what's in it for me, what's in it for you, and what's in it for the organization. I need the answer to those three questions. You can see by my presentation, I'm sort of a rule of three guy. But those three things need to be answered before I can even have any prayer of being successful.
Okay. I don't have any questions written. Anybody, if you guys have a question, please write it in the chat window. We still have a few more minutes. So I might ask a question. So
sure,
with the PMI, you know, global PMI right now, purchasing the discipline Agile, and, you know, like you mentioned, going Agile, the waterfall, sinking down. I know that a lot of people were asking me, will the project management profession, you know, if you are working as a strictly waterfall, would that survive in the next few years? What are you thinking?
Will waterfall survive? Is that the question?
Agile. Will the waterfall survive methodology?
Okay, yeah. Well, you know, ever since the PMI acquired Discipline Agile, the rumor mills are just really churning out stuff. I mean, it's crazy. But the fact of the matter is, I've not seen PMI strategy. They don't they guard that like it's the family jewels. But I can tell you, based on my conversations with Sunil, he feels that the addition of Disciplined Agile gives the project management professional another option. That they can look to, is this going to help me be a better project manager? And if it is, maybe I ought to be certified in it. I can tailor that Discipline Agile. So that part is that came up. Everybody criticized that in the beginning. I think it's a good move. I applauded it, so I get some brownie points from PMI. But the fact of the matter is Sunil is the waterfall going to survive? Now, see, I'm going to give you my personal opinion, so I got to be careful. I'd be shocked if it did. I don't think there's room for waterfall and agile and scrum and discipline. I don't think there's room for all. I shouldn't say room. I don't think we need all of those. So I think the market will sift itself out. So 5 years from now, I think it'll look very different than it looks today.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. There was a question if you could share your contact information. I know you guys can find Mr. Lambert on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind connecting with you. Is there an email address or anything else we can provide?
There is. Let's see if I got my chat. Here it is. Down here, chat.
Okay, and I can look it up through my email and send it out to.
I think I'm going to get it. I'm a terrible typer, so there might be errors. Let me see.
Okay. We had recently the conversation about LinkedIn, so I think everybody should be connected or should be on LinkedIn, and you can just look up Mr. Lee R. Lambert. So let me just put it down on the LinkedIn.
All right, I think it's in there. Hopefully that's going to be good. Yeah, I encourage you to LinkedIn. I've sort of sifted down to where LinkedIn for me, for business, is absolutely the best. I have 27,000 LinkedIn connections. and I work those, and I share information, and I encourage you to share with me. So please don't hesitate to request connection if you aren't connected already. I suspect some of you are already. But with this pandemic, you see, I got nothing but time on my hands. So give me something to do. Challenge me. Give me something that will be worthwhile for me to dig into. But in the meantime, look for ways you can add value. Look for ways that you can raise this idea of strategic linkage beyond the just talk about it stage. Look for ways you can make it happen. It will pay off for you. It will pay huge dividends for you as a project manager if you can make that connection.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. Just for everybody, there will be a recording. I'll try to post it on the YouTube, Western Michigan PMI channel later today. Remember, that's a one big enchilada. That's definitely a phrase I'll remember. Thank you so much. It was a more than pleasure having you come and present to our chapter. Thank you very much.
It was truly my pleasure, and best of luck to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, members.